So welcome to episode 3 of Emergency on Planet Sport. What are you laughing at? And
Oh dear.
I'm a very croaky Jonathan Overend. However, I want this to be known. I am pressing on with today's recording session valiantly. Melissa, valiantly. Do you have a medal for me?
Oh, well, I'm Melissa Wilson. I'm wondering, what's the cause? Have you been having too many late nights down with SailGP?
No, not not at all. Just one of those things floating in the air. But I'm glad this is a remote recording session, as they say, and we're not together on our sofa in Soho. Just in case. We're very vigilant here. I hope it doesn't sound too awful. Does it sound too awful? Should we reschedule?
I'll survive, so hopefully our listeners will stay with us too.
Oh no, that's a terrible verdict.
Sorry, poor teammanship. You sound great. We're going to be fine.
Okay. That was a really interesting last episode, I thought, with the SailGP people, because we touched briefly on this idea of a new kind of winning, and I think we need to sort of take that further a little bit, Melissa.
Yeah, I love that idea that this is about more than scoring goals, more than crossing the line first. We all know that winning is one of the things we love about sport. How do we translate that into what we're doing about the environment and how we're engaging in that way? I love it.
Yeah, because I suppose SailGP is an example of an event, a global series advocating this. How do we now take it forward to, I don't know, engage fans, engage maybe around football clubs? Can the supporters rise to the challenge, do you think?
Well, you've been to Bristol, haven't you, with hopefully less of a croaky voice. And I think there's loads of great work being done there by an organisation called Pledgeball, led by the brilliant Katie Cross.
Yeah, I met her at Ashton Gate. You'll hear from Katie, along with Pete Smith from Bristol City. And what followed was a really interesting half an hour of conversation. I guarantee you'll take something from this, whether you work in sport or if you're just a supporter of a club like the Robins. Pete Smith, Katie Cross, episode 3 of Emergency on Planet Croak, series 2. Here we go. Well, Katie, let's... What I find really interesting about coming to meet you today is that you have this very clear idea of how we should be approaching the conversation regarding sport and sustainability, in that, yes, it's down to governance and it's big corporations and they need to make big decisions, but it is also about all of us. We're all on a level playing field almost, and it's about harnessing us as individuals to lead on this topic. Can you sort of expand a bit more on where that belief comes from?
You're absolutely right. I mean, I think we are all slightly paralysed in the fact that we think that things happen to us. But actually, when you look at, with regards to climate, the statistics involved in direct carbon savings, we have a huge part to play. And not only that, but where we can directly reduce carbon emissions, we also feed in systemic change. So when it comes to making the radical shift that we need to see, it needs to come in a kind of multi-pronged approach. It needs to come from the bottom, both in terms of people making those informed, desired choices that they themselves want, but also in terms of them putting pressure on all governments across the world to make those changes that we need to see to accelerate this. Because if we allow the process of democracy to play out, we're not going to see the radical changes we need to see. And as individuals, when we look at stats, particularly with regards to sport, on a very simple level, those stats are really empowering. So, I mean, we're at Ashton Gate. You know, one Ashton Gate's worth of fans simply reducing shower time to 5 minutes equates to taking over 2,000 cars off the road. Now, that's a simple change, but that in itself demonstrates the very, very small start that we can make as individuals and the potential for having much greater change.
Well, the interesting thing about that is we're talking there about, in a way, about the tone of the conversation as well, aren't we? And sort of like moving away from this, well, you know, the world's going to end, it's all terrible, which it kind of is, but that's not going to get your average Bristol City season ticket holder getting off their chair and taking action on a match day, for example. So that's where your project comes in. Tell us about Pledgeball.
You're right. Those doom and gloom stats and facts are completely paralysing. But when you switch that around, actually, there are so many people who haven't been mobilised around climate change, and that is where Pledgeball comes in.
Yeah. I should point out that I've already given some doom and gloom stats in this series already. So I know that's your opinion, and I really hope you're not unsubscribing as a result. I just think sometimes we need reminding of the crisis that we are in, and then park that, and then come to the conversation, what are we going to do about it?
So you're actually absolutely right. And there is completely a part to play for those doom and gloom stats and facing up to it. But what we need is the initial engagement first from a lot of people who haven't addressed those yet. Because I think there is a process you have to go through where you kind of go through this absolute despair maybe, and then come to terms with it and see that there are actions that you can take and there is potential really to drive change.
Yeah.
And that's what we aim to do. So Pledgeball aims to engage that very large proportion of people who feel completely alienated by climate activism. It engages people through something that they're already emotionally engaged with and engaged on a regular basis. So it does this obviously through sport and primarily at the moment through football, because that is where our research lies and because of the nature of football. So the way it does this is it asks fans to make pro-environmental pledges in support of their clubs. So each match day, fans can make those pledges. The team of fans that pledges to save the most emissions wins the fixture, and the cumulative amount they pledge to save determines their place within the Pledgeball League.
Nice. Because we love winning. That's what sport's all about, isn't it?
We do love winning, don't we, Pete?
We do.
So Pete Smith from Bristol City, you are project manager. You do this, you do that, you run the show. Frankly, there wouldn't be a Bristol City or an Ashton Gate without this man. So thank you so much for taking up some of your valuable time. Just tell us why Bristol City wanted to be part of this initiative at the start.
Fundamentally, what Katie's trying to achieve ticks all the boxes for us. It's simple, it's engaging, and it's positive. And it's a little bit competitive. And those are what sport and Bristol City and Ashton Gate are about. So it just seemed a very small first step for us to potentially make a big difference. And not just within our fan base, but if we could partner with Pledgeball and enable them to then expand to other clubs and other sports and potentially other territories, then the potential of Pledgeball is absolutely massive.
What sort of take-up has there been among your fan base?
Yeah, I mean, the fan base have been absolutely brilliant in engaging with this across both the men's team and the women's team. And last year, I think it was around 432,000 kilograms of carbon have been saved by the pledges made by Bristol City fans in the first iteration of Pledgeball, which again shows that a small amount of changes by a lot of people can make a massive amount of difference. And that is just the start. So yeah, it's been really positive. It's fun and it's simple, and it doesn't take away any enjoyment from the fan of the sport. It adds to it, and that's exactly how we're trying to package our own journey. Is it's adding to.
So this is one key thing to point out: is that we're not a behaviour change campaign as such. We aim to shift people's mindsets and relationships with climate change. So moving away from that relationship where you feel you have no control to one where you feel you can truly play a part and you can see that you're part of a collective taking action. So we're looking at a mindset shift with the aim being that it then sparks conversation in spheres where it hasn't before.
Yeah. What's really interesting about coming here to Bristol City is that a lot of football clubs, particularly in the UK, are very much starting out on this journey and sort of wondering what their first steps are going to be in this space. But Pete, you've been here a long time. Take us back to 2010.
Yeah, I mean, Bristol City back in 2010 took part in the 10-10 Climate Change Initiative, where companies across the UK were encouraged to target 10% reductions in their energy usage in the year 2010. And we achieved our target. I'll be honest, I think there's much more potential now to do a lot more good. I think the conversation's changed. I think people's perceptions have changed. And I think, in all honesty, the activities that us and other clubs can go on now will be more significant, more long-lasting and more fundamental. And obviously, the world's moved on. Targets have changed. Expectations have changed.
Of course, absolutely. And just give us an idea. Is the desire to make environmentally conscious decisions at the heart of this football club?
Yes, in a simple way. In terms of buy-in, we've got supports on this project from top to bottom. So prior to launching our what's called Project Whitebeam, which is our group-wide shift in what we do for the environment, prior to launching that, we spoke to supporters groups. we spoke to staff, we spoke to chief executives, we spoke to the owner. So we know that Steve Lansdowne as an owner, Richard Gould as a CEO are right behind us in what we do. And that's critical because it means that there's an authenticity and a genuine push to change the way that we operate and to make significant change and not simply window dress in a sort of a PR marketing sense.
Absolutely. I mean, sustainability needs to be not something that is an extra that is showcased, but needs to be something that is integral to every single decision that is made. And I mean, Pete said, the culture has shifted. Those organisations that decide to do that now are going to be the first on that train that everybody else will be boarding in a very short while.
Pete, you mentioned Project Whitebeam then a moment ago. Just tell us a little bit more about that concept, the aim, and what you're trying to deliver on that.
Yeah, so Project Whitebeam is a group-wide initiative to understand, recognise, measure, and then mitigate and reduce the impact that the sporting group has on the climate.
And I better just point out at this point for people who aren't aware, we're talking about an organisation here called Bristol Sport, which is an umbrella organisation which covers Bristol City, men's and women's. What else is in it?
Yeah, so we've got Bristol City men's and women's teams. We've got Bristol Bears men's and women's teams. We've got Bristol Flyers basketball. We've also got Ashton Gate Stadium, which is a standalone conference and events venue. So is really quite a significant
There's a
business.
lot of things under that umbrella, under that group. There are a lot of supporters there. There are a lot of athletes with influence. Yeah. There are a lot of commercial partners. So it's a big organisation.
It's a big organisation, and that gives us the ability to deliver hopefully significant change. But let's frame this correctly. The first thing that we did when we actually researched and launched Project Whitebeam internally was to first off say, we ain't going to be going out there on day one and saving the world. That's not what it's about. And it'd be wrong of us to suggest that we are. We are recognising that we have an impact. We're seeking to measure it and we're seeking to reduce it. And we'll be honest, we don't know yet, A, how big our footprint is, and B, how we're going to meet those targets. But what we do have is an absolute commitment to get there. And so we've started the journey.
Absolutely. I mean, I always liked Pete, but listening to him then, it's grown a bit more. Because I
almost got emotional.
I know it did. Because it's absolutely about owning where you're at and facing reality rather than, as Pete said, setting out to save the world. It's looking at exactly the impact that you're having and therefore how to go about reducing it and not being afraid of criticism either in that or accepting help. Because that's the only way that we're going to encourage everybody to get on board is if we're supportive of everyone starting on those journeys.
So who, Pete, is asking, if you like, the challenging questions of the governance? Is that down to you? I mean, if you see the team going to an away match and you think they could get there by more sustainable means, are you allowed to put that question to the first team manager or whoever takes that decision? I know that's above your pay grade, but
I think Project Whitebeam enables us to ask the questions. It doesn't necessarily give me or anybody within the working groups the authority to make the change. Sports organisations are relatively large and diverse in terms of the areas that we will look at. And so what's critical within that is I'm not an expert in team performance, team travel. I'm not an expert in catering or in energy supplies or catering supplies or food. But we'd have a team that are. What Project Whitebeam asks and challenges the team to do is to look at everything through a green lens. Because if we're honest, to date, and I think across most sports clubs, there are probably two considerations, or maybe three, that go into almost every day-to-day decision you make. Is it going to cost money to do? Is it going to make money? And is it going to be simple? Right? Yeah. And there has to be a fourth question in there. Is it the right thing to do through that green lens? And going back to where we're at with Pledgeball, that's what we're really asking supporters to do. The biggest first step we can do is encourage everybody to put those green glasses on when they make their everyday decisions. And that might be at Ashton Gate, it might be how they come to and from games, but it may well just be at home. So to get people considering it, and ultimately, I genuinely now believe that there's a pathway to us all just doing things differently. And in 5, 10, 15 years, we'll probably wonder why we ever did things in a different way. But it's critical that we just get people thinking in those terms. And then the exact details of how it all falls into place, it's a journey. That's why the target, the 50% reduction, is 2030 and not, the 8th of September 2022. Yes. Because that's the start of the journey. It's an 8-year journey.
I think, interestingly, what you say about getting people to think about the sustainable options, I think actually a lot of people are there. the research consistently indicates it's over 70% of people who want, climate action to be taken, but most are paralysed by the fact that the sustainable decision is the harder one, and are desperate for people who provide infrastructure to make those decisions easier for them, and also to make them not feel alone. People generally don't have conversations about climate change. It's not something that often comes up at the moment, and probably happens more frequently, but not in your general daily life. And so when you feel you're not alone, and when you feel you can make those sustainable decisions, I think there'll be a huge amount of relief.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. The conversation about, I'm imagining now a supporter who comes here on match day. They'll buy their beer, they'll buy their burger, and then they'll stand out there, Pete, having a chat about something until the teams come out, and then they can moan at the manager for the rest of the afternoon. What would it take, do you think, to get them talking about the environment, about sustainability?
We've seen it, haven't we?
Well, we have. I think one critical thing, and why Katie is getting a hook. And Pledgeball provides us with that hook, that competitive spin, a bit of fun, something to get your teeth into. In a wider sense, it goes back to not making it here goes conversation, or I'm going to get lectured at. Ashton Gate and Bristol City is a fun environment. It's what people do in their leisure. We are an entertainment, leisure and events place. People don't come to Ashton Gate or support Bristol City to feel bad or to cure the world. They come to here in their fun time, right? So we need to make sure it's packaged correctly. But if we, as Katie just mentioned, if we can provide fans with easy to do, simple life choices at the stadium, coming to the stadium, that might be sustainable food choices at the stadium, sustainable travel to and from, and then a few takeaway ideas or thought processes for when you're away from the ground, then I think we're on the way. And going back to how many people are already engaged with this conversation, a lot of people are, but a lot of people aren't. And football and Bristol City have the ability to reach certain audiences that may not, in the nicest possible way, may not tune into podcasts about environmental sustainability.
Of course, yeah.
They may not read newspapers that champion this stuff. So I think it's also about reaching those hard-to-reach audiences and potentially floating conversation which they initially bat back.
Yeah, interesting.
Because if everybody just cotton onto this straight away, then we're probably just preaching to the converted, and we're probably not actually making much difference. The bigger question of climate change, it doesn't stop in South Bristol. It doesn't stop at international borders. It is a global challenge, so the more people that can be on board with that, the better.
Well, there is an interesting twist to this story this season, isn't there, here in Bristol? Because if we're talking about people who aren't engaged in this conversation, one thing they are engaged in this city is rivalry with the other team. And Bristol Rovers, I gather, are now signed up for Pledgeball.
Yeah, I better tell them to announce this before this podcast goes out.
Okay.
Yes, they are. Very excitingly, the Gas are on board. So we'll have a nice bit of Bristol rivalry this season.
Pledgeball derby.
I can't wait. They're pretty keen, pretty determined.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think that's a real positive. And it's something that myself and Katie have spoken about a lot over the last year or so. It's not only...
you are sweating though, Pete.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. It's opening the doors to other clubs and other leagues and other sports, and the potential that Pledgeball, it really could go anywhere it wants to. We've been very keen to champion Pledgeball to other clubs and contacts that we have, and anybody that's Katie's put in touch with us, we'd only speak highly of Pledgeball. It's genuinely in a good partnership. In true energy-saving mode, our energy-saving lights have just turned off on us, so somebody wave their hands.
Magnificent. Someone literally has turned the lights out.
It's our energy-saving lights.
Okay, that's brilliant.
We need to move a little bit.
Right, we now need to... There we go.
Apologies for that.
We run around the room and we get the lights back on. You're listening to Emergency on Planet Sport, Episode 3. I'm Jonathan Overend in Bristol, in conversation with Pete Smith from Bristol City and Katie Cross from Pledgeball. I love this idea of a new kind of winning. While I'm talking to Pete and Katie, my mind's racing. I'm thinking of my day job as a sports reporter, going to matches. It's all about who scores more goals than the other team. Or is it? I love this idea that one day there'll be a team who might have gone away from home, lost the match, and the manager might have got the sack on the Monday morning. But one weekend, this particular weekend, that team goes away from home. Yes, they lose the match, but they leave the private jet at home, or they leave the fuel-driven bus at home, and they go to the match by more sustainable means. They come back, they've lost the match, but you know what? The manager doesn't get the sack. because the manager or the CEO or whoever it was has taken that bold decision to take a really significant step in an environmental sense. That to me has potential. That to me is a new kind of winning.
In terms of will sports clubs be measured by different things other than just on the pitch? I think in the near future, it's probably soon, while I'm still on the planet, I imagine the ultimate league table will be the results league table.
Oh, I think this is a very dangerous question in a way. I mean,
Why is it a dangerous question?
I think when you frame it to, I'm thinking about how we frame it to those people who engage with Pledgeball. And I think we need to respect what Pete referred to earlier as the fact that people are going for their leisure. And it needs to remain as something that is fun and entertaining, and there's that trust involved. There's no checking up. And so if the stakes are too high, then it no longer becomes that.
Interesting.
But I do think things have shifted in terms of what supporters and owners and the press and players and all partners and staff, etc., expect from the organisation that they celebrate, spend money with or work for. Go back maybe 20, 30 years, social consciousness within football clubs in the 90s. What do we have? The early days of Kick It Out, where football recognised a problem that was partly within it, but actually a broader societal issue, and engaged with it. But that was probably about it. And these days, I generally think fans, and again, fan sponsors, partners, etc., do care about how their clubs are operated. We do not expect to come to Ashton Gate and find staff that have been abused or mistreated. You wouldn't come to Ashton Gate and expect problems within the safeguarding of your junior players. You wouldn't come to any of that stuff. And even in more recent history, you've seen how, see that step change that we saw with the taking a knee? Because first time fans did it in England, the first game, 80% of the stadium was silent and 10 to 20% booed. And that's about it. So the majority were with them, but a week later, they were cheered and roundly applauded almost everywhere they went. And that is a fan base going to a football game in their leisure time. Yes, the biggest thing they want that day is to win. Of course, it's a football game. But they also came with a conscience and a wider social issue and something that they felt was important to them to represent. It's the shirt that I'm wearing to the pub and on the street and on the tube and on the tram, whatever it is to the game, and I want to feel proud of it. I want to feel part of it. I want it to reflect my values. And of course there's a challenge there because values are broad, political values are broad, but actually with environment, again, we come back to that thing. I think we moved on. I think everybody accepts that there's a massive global challenge. The impact of getting this wrong is going to be absolutely huge, and not just to a few people in a faraway land, but to us here in Bristol playing football. So I think fans now get that and want us to be doing it. They expect us to be doing it.
Yeah. Wow. That was very passionate. And I think you
think
can't help but listen to that and actually think, wow, yeah, absolutely.
I know.
Every word you say, spot on.
The other nice thing about that is it really showcases the power of fans to make visible the fact that they care, in that way. And that is part of this, is making visible the fact that people care. Yeah. The other interesting thing there is it draws upon some of the characteristics of success for transformational behaviour change. And one of those is collective efficacy beliefs. One is social norms, because you'd have that minority who wouldn't support that, but they'd be drawn along by everybody else. I mean, I think there's some stats, aren't there? I think it's 0.3% of people maybe protesting brings about a social cultural shift. 25% of people adopting a new social norm, so far lower bar, again brings about that cultural shift. And I think that's where the potential for mobilising football fans is so huge.
Yeah, and I'd also say that when we talk here at Bristol City and Ashton Gate about Project Whitebeam, the intention is that we enable fans to do what they want to do anyway in this environmental space. We're not telling them they've got to. We're not beating them around a stick. We're enabling it through decisions that we make here. Paid members of staff, we come here and we work hard and it's part of what we do. But the outcome of that, even if you do not care one iota about the environment, and some people don't, is that the changes that we are making will not make the fan experience worse. They will not make it a less fun day out. They will not make Bristol City Football Club less competitive. Some people do ask the question. When they see things launched, they say, well, why are you launching this? You should be signing a left back or a striker or whatever. But the reality of it is that Project Whitebeam for us will make a brighter, more positive, better Ashton Gate and Bristol City in the future. We will be more attractive for talented workforce to come and work for us. Will be more attractive for commercial partners, will be more attractive for citywide organisations, partners who will then open doors and enable us. Mm-hmm. And even if you bring it down to the really hard finances and the crux of what makes money, or what costs money, should I say, if we do nothing, we will be behind the curve and hamstrung in a few years' time, because there's only one way that the status quo is going to go, and that's everything's going to get more expensive. And I would say that before the current energy crisis, and I know there's specific, hopefully shorter term reasons for some of that, but we do know that the country and the city and the world would need to decarbonise. So we either start that journey now, and it's going to set us at a competitive advantage to other clubs, and it's going to make it a lot easier when we make each step change, or we wait, and we fall off a cliff in 8, 9, 10 years' time. I don't know what the future holds in terms of regulation or taxation, but I'm pretty confident energy prices for non-renewables will go up. I'm pretty certain that things like carbon taxes and the infrastructure costs behind gas will go up. And I'm pretty certain that non-sustainable travel will become harder, not just because of an environmental thing, but because there are more people and more housing developments in and around, for example, Bristol. So, hey, you know what? If we want to still have stadium full in 10 years' time, we've got to find a really good way of getting people in and out, which doesn't rely on single-use petrol or diesel cars. Because otherwise we'll have an empty stadium. Fans don't need to worry about that. I'm not expecting them to. We can reassure them that me worrying about this on a day-to-day basis isn't taking away a single ounce of energy from the team or from the players' management. It's not going to make any difference to the result on Saturday. But what I would say in our example is that the senior management and the players are very well aware of Project Whitebeam. They know what we're doing, why we're doing it. They even know why we've named it.
Why have you named it? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
30 minutes in and I haven't asked you.
So called it Project Whitebeam. Primarily, first of all, we didn't want to call anything zero, because we felt that the environmental thing went beyond just carbon and just greenhouse gases. There's also waste and water and biodiversity, etc. We also didn't want to turn anybody off from the message. And we felt, and it's backed up by some of the researchers that Katie's put us in touch with, that had we labelled something green, for example, then some people just wouldn't pick the book up off the shelf, because they'd go, green, I know what's going to happen here. I'm going to pick up that book and we get told what to do. And then we went out searching for something that is uniquely Bristolian. And so the Whitebeam is a plant. It's part of the rose family. There are various different species of it, of which a number of them are endemic to the Avon Gorge and Lee Woods, around a mile away from Ashton Gate. So about a mile that way grow 3 species of Whitebeam that don't grow anywhere else in the world. Therefore, they're uniquely Bristolian, and they reflect both the fragility and the immediacy of the climate change issue for us.
I'm so pleased I asked.
And hey, I spent a lot of sleepless nights trying to work out what we're going to call it. A little notepad at the side of my bed that my wife wondered what was being scribbled in. It was 55 different options for what I was going to call it.
But the great news is there'll be somebody around a dinner table tonight who will be saying, did you know that there's a species from the rose family that grows in the Avon? Anyway.
Going back to your primary question here, I think, to be honest, a quicker way of ensuring that this is endemic is by following the Bundesliga's example and introducing sustainability criteria into the licensing.
Right.
I think
they are doing that now, aren't they?
Yeah. So as of this season, that's exactly what they've done. But I think the issue is, if you make it a league, some clubs have more capacity than others to address it. One of the big things is capacity and the immediate demands of a club. They are a business. How do they function as a business? And so unless it is a requirement at the moment, I don't think it's going to be given the resources that it requires to properly address environmental sustainability.
Because by its very nature of what Pete set out, every club kind of needs a Pete.
Every club does need a Pete, yeah.
I think we've definitely found that out, by the way, over the last 40 minutes. Goodness me, Pete, have you run for local councillor? You know, I think you could.
No,
you could do a lot. Look, before we go, I do want to just touch on a couple more of the specifics about how supporters can help a club like Bristol City rise up the Pledgeball League table. Pete touched on supporter transport a moment ago. Is that an obvious one, Katie?
I mean, it's very simple. So a fan on match day goes onto the Pledgeball website. They click on their team for that particular fixture and it brings up a registration page of pledges. Now, currently, those pledges are not match day specific. We're actually introducing a few match day specific ones with associated carbon savings. But actually, they can pledge to do a whole variety of things. So it's very accessible. So it ranges from, switching to using a reusable cup to going vegan 2 days a week to installing solar panels. And for each of those, there is an associated carbon saving. So it then feeds back what quantity of emissions that individual will save compared to the average family by carrying that out, by switching to that change. So it's as simple as that. You can see on there the varying impacts of these. But the reason we've kept it at such a full list harks back to that academic research we carried out in the first instance, in that it meant that everybody enjoyed engaging with that pledge list, regardless of where they were on their sort of environmental sustainability journey, whether they had come across and faced those doom and gloom facts and therefore were at the end where they wanted big impact changes and to feed more rapidly into systemic change, all the way back to those who haven't even started, but actually it's just a fun way to engage and support their club.
It is a challenge, but what I would say is, and why Pledgeball is so good, in a sort of crude way, it almost outsources a little bit of a headache for us because Pledgeball is really, really simple. It's really, really simple for the fans. It probably takes them, a couple of minutes to get on the website and make a pledge. It's really, really simple for the club. So what I'd say to any club that's listening to this is engage with Pledgeball because it's not hard. A couple of emails to Katie and a couple of introductions to a couple of members of the team and a couple of social media posts and website stories and maybe a post from the toilets, and you've made that start on that journey, and you can make that big impact. With just that, within a year, you could have that sort of 460,000 kilograms of carbon saved like we did. It doesn't need to be overly complicated. And when you are shy on resource and time, and there's other competing pressures, and I completely get that, speak to Katie because it will be completely worth doing it. And I'd love every club in the league to be pushing Pledgeball this year because they should be, and it's easy for them. It's a good thing for them. They won't regret it. So.
I did not pay Peach, by the way.
All right, good to have that clarified. Thank you, Katie. Katie Cross there, before that, Pete Smith. I thought that was really interesting, Melissa. I mean, before we get into some of the nuts and bolts of what they were saying, what did you make of that conversation generally?
Yeah, well, I love that note that it ended on and Pete's capacity to draw out just how simple and easy some of this has been. The idea that it's literally having a conversation with Katie, putting a poster in your toilets and the rollout effect and the impact that some of that can lead to. So that alone, I think Katie and Pete did such a good job throughout of emphasising this is not about making something harder or less fun. It's about taking all the momentum that the sport has naturally and running with that to have maximum impact.
Yeah, and there was a lot of chat, wasn't there, about the way that this is communicated to the supporters. And it sounded to me like Pete was very wary of that, wary of upsetting them, scaring them, maybe making them feel like they were being lectured to. How important is that, in your opinion, to get them on board with this conversation first and foremost, and then let's see what we can all do together?
Yeah, some of what they drew out about particular words, the vocabulary that's used, I found really interesting. The idea that they're consciously avoiding phrases like net zero, green, because they think that's going to turn people off and return them to this kind of psychologically paralysed place. The fact
is that right? Do you think, is the jury out on that, or what do you think?
I think that, I know that Katie's been working with an organisation called Climate Outreach that does some really interesting research into polling a lot of people to understand how these sorts of things land. I remember one of their other pieces of research was about using the vocabulary of fairness, because that is a kind of unifying value that can bind people together, and even to the extent of the nuances between saying we're not going to use the words justice and climate justice because that reminds people of the justice system and lawyers and an area that maybe they're not so comfortable with. So we talk about fairness, and I think what Katie and Pete did really well is setting out the tiering of responses within an organisation. So it's not to push all of this. What Pledgeball and Katie are doing is not pushing all of the weight of responsibility onto the fans. They're actually taking a lot of the responsibility off. It's engaging in a fun way. They're not checking up on people. They're not saying, look, we're going to guilt trip you and make you feel bad about this. It's about an organisation thinking intelligently so that we en masse can respond appropriately to the challenges that we're facing.
I was quite interested when I was asking Pete about can you ask the challenging questions? I suppose what I was getting at, can you go to the top of this football club? Can you knock on the manager's door and say, oh, are you flying to Middlesbrough? Why are you flying to Middlesbrough? And I'm very conscious that sort of thing will be well above his pay grade. And to be honest, probably above the first team manager's pay grade as well. Someone's taking an executive decision there.
Yeah, that's why it was so interesting. So that when he mentioned that the Bundesliga has this has introduced sustainability criteria for the licensing of the clubs, I think that echoed more than ever the fact that we need this hierarchy of engagement. And I think Peter's probably spot on when he talks about their role as a club and Pledgeball's role as an organisation being about enabling and making people feel empowered and that they have autonomy and capacity to make these changes. But I think that doesn't mean that has to be the approach right the way through the ecosystem of sport. I think that there are absolutely circumstances in which that more directive approach is appropriate, and that's probably what we're seeing there with the Bundesliga.
And also, I'm sensing there's a bit of you that also wants to say, Pete, go on, knock on the manager's door. You want to.
Yeah.
You want to ask that question, because we're going to actually hear later in the series about an example at a football club where a supporter just wrote to the club asking for something to happen, something very specific, and it did happen.
Yeah.
So I suppose the point is you just don't know unless you ask the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if it's not the people who work in this space and are face to face with some of the science and the evidence behind these concerns and these realities, if it's not those people who have the conversations, then who else are we expecting to have them? And that is not a direct comment on any one individual's approach, but I think en masse, one of the things that we are hearing across quite a few of our interviews, I feel like if we did a word cloud, we would hear the word small in terms of small steps reiterated quite a lot. I think it's got a notable presence across the conversations we're having. And these are people who accept the severity of the crisis we're facing and the need to act ambitiously. I do feel like if we're talking small steps, what circumstances would we need to have in order to have big steps, and why are we not saying we need the big steps? So I think that's something maybe we explore a bit further at another time, because there's a strategic piece absolutely about bringing people on side, but we can't all stick with the line about small steps because it just doesn't match up to the reality of the size of the challenge we're facing.
Well, on that, I think that will lead us very nicely on to episode 4. And by the way, we'll put all the links for Pledgeball and the work that they're doing in the show notes, so you can find out more if you want to discover more about Katie Cross's initiative down there in Bristol. But in episode 4, I think we're going to be taking that line that Pete Smith said in that conversation, talking about his leadership at Bristol City, saying there's an authenticity about it. It's not just window dressing, he said, in a PR and marketing sense. And that's really important, isn't it? And that strikes to the heart of what you've just said there. So that needs CEOs on board. That needs chairs of the board on board. I think it's high time we met one and asked a few questions of people who lead top flight sports organisations. So that's where we're heading in episode 4. And yeah, we'll see whether there's any voice left by the time we get there. Disappointing, isn't it? I mean, we're only 3 episodes into the series.
Is it the emotion? Is it getting to you?
It is the emotion. I've only been doing this 26 years. I don't think I've lost my voice once. Here we go.
Not the time, Jonathan.
This is what you do to me. Anyway, episode 4 on the way.
See you there.